Hi, I'm Linda. I want to tell you about the time I had to compete with my mom for my crush's attention. It all began when I lost an earring during a yoga class. My instructor, Jack, got down on his knees and crawled around on the floor helping me search for it. At one point, we bumped into each other and kissed by accident. We never found the earring, but I was still over the moon. After all, I had liked Jack for 2 months at that point, ever since the day when he'd begun to work as a yoga instructor at my gym club. Jack asked me out for coffee. Over a latte, I told him about my family. My dad worked as a jeweler and gave me and my mom a cool piece of jewelry every holiday for gifts. So, over the years, I had accumulated a lot of jewelry. But the lost earring was especially precious to me. Those earrings were my dad's very first gift. He'd given me those earrings right after my ears had gotten pierced. Jack promised he'd keep looking, and we moved on to other topics. From that day on, Jack and I became a couple. A month later, I decided to introduce him to my parents, and I invited him over. I was terribly worried. After all, he was the first guy I'd ever brought to my house. And for some reason, my mom didn't like my boyfriend. She acted weird at the table. She didn't talk, ate a lot, and kept looking at her phone. In the end, I couldn't stand it, so I called her into the kitchen, saying I wanted to make more lemonade. Mom, what is the matter with you? Do you not like Jack or something? I'm sorry, honey. He hasn't done anything wrong. It's just that your dad hasn't come home for dinner again, even though this is such an important day for you. I decided to finish my dinner as soon as possible and take Jack to my room to watch a movie. However, when we came back with fresh lemonade, Jack took matters into his own hands. He handed my mom a certificate for yoga classes as a thank you for her hospitality. Mom was so happy that she finally started to talk to Jack and put more food on his plate. Now it looked like they were finally getting to know each other. Long story short, I was happy. If only I had known how it would end. The next day, my mom and I went to Jack's yoga class. I would never have thought my mom was so stiff. She couldn't even do the simplest asanas. At first, Jack tried to explain everything using words. But when those attempts failed, he had to help my mother stretch. He was paying way too much attention to her, and soon that started to bother me. I started making mistakes on purpose, but Jack was too engrossed with her to notice. After class, I told him about how it made me uncomfortable. Jack was surprised. Wait, what? I just wanted your mom to like me. There's nothing wrong with that. So I calmed down, and Jack and I spent the whole evening together. In the morning, I regretted having walked along the embankment without a cardigan on. My throat hurt, and I had a slight fever. So I decided I would skip college for the day and stay home. After taking some medicine, putting on headphones, and sitting by the windowsill with my notebook, I started to compose poems for my mother's birthday. I got so carried away, I didn't pay attention to anything happening around me. But after finishing the next few lines, I looked out my window and saw my Jack. He was coming out of our house. Huh? But what was he doing here? I took off my headphones and I ran downstairs. Mom was happily putting a bouquet of roses in a vase. Jack came by to say good morning. What a great guy, Linda. You are so lucky. I remembered Jack's words and I smiled. He was just trying to please my mom for my sake. I didn't have anything to worry about. So I went back to my room and I continued to write. However, after a few minutes, I was interrupted again. There was shouting coming from the living room. My parents were arguing about something, and I ran to the noise. Dad was standing near the bouquet with a note in his hands. Who is he? Answer me! I got between my parents and I tried to explain everything to Dad. But then I saw what Jack had written in the note. To the most gorgeous woman. I suddenly felt dizzy. Giving a compliment like that to your girlfriend's mom was a little strange. So I ran outside and I took a deep breath. Okay, Linda, calm down. There had to be an explanation for this. I called Jack. Why haven't you given me flowers like that? Or given me compliments? Why would you even come to my house if you thought I wouldn't be there? Jack went ballistic after such questions. He accused me of not appreciating his efforts at all and constantly finding fault with him for everything he did. He said he'd been trying to charm my mom so she would let me go on vacation with him. But I didn't believe that, and we had a big fight. It was even bad enough that I decided I wouldn't go to yoga class that evening, and instead I would watch TV in the living room. But my mom wasn't gonna skip the class. She came downstairs wearing new, tight sportswear with a deep neckline. Was she wearing that for Jack? I decided I would see how they interacted without me around. So I got a taxi and I followed my mom's car. I also put some stones under the windows of the gym, and when the class began, I looked in the window. What I saw, I had not been expecting. Jack and my mom were alone. No one else was in the studio. What would you do if you were me? I came home and I told Dad everything, but he said I was worried over nothing. My boyfriend couldn't possibly be hitting on my mom. So to make sure of that, Dad suggested we invite Jack to Mom's birthday party. I didn't want to text Jack first. The next day, he came by and asked me to forgive him for his rudeness, and he handed me a gift as an apology, an iPhone 13. But it was way too early to rejoice. First, I needed to get to the bottom of what was going on. So, why were you and Mom alone yesterday? Where were all the other girls? I was very worried about our fight, so I canceled the class. But I forgot to include our newest member, your mom, in the newsletter. That's why she still came to the gym. I couldn't just tell her to leave. That would have been rude. Well, that sounded like the truth. I hugged Jack and accepted the iPhone, and it was amazing. The camera was absolutely fantastic. I started running around the house, taking photos of everything. Flowers, my cat, a sofa, a dressing table. After I'd finally calmed down, I came back to Jack and invited him to my mom's birthday. Not as a test, but just because I wanted to. Soon enough, Jack left, and I kept getting acquainted with my new iPhone. In the evening, my mom noticed it and asked who'd given it to me. My parents had always forbidden me from accepting expensive gifts from boys, so I had to lie. I'd been saving up my pocket money. Mom narrowed her eyes at me suspiciously. I didn't want her to interrogate me, so I scurried away to my room. Downstairs, my parents started fighting about something again. I listened in. It turned out that my mom had lost an expensive bracelet Dad had given her for their wedding anniversary. I just put on my headphones and fell asleep. The next morning was busy. Downstairs, Dad was decorating the house for the celebration, and Mom was humming something and preparing a festive dinner. I spent the day helping my parents, and Jack came in the evening. We sat down at the table, and I read my poem to my mother. I didn't think it would have moved her so much. Mom even burst into tears and left the table to wipe off her running mascara. Jack went with her. I decided I would see what they were up to. I tiptoed into the kitchen and cautiously peeked around the corner. Mom was chatting with Jack about something near a giant cake. I saw her dip her finger into the cream and taste it. Jack didn't take his eyes off her. It looked way too… you know. I decided I would call my dad so he could see this for himself. But he'd locked himself in his office and was talking to some important client. I didn't know what to do. Mom and Jack weren't really doing anything wrong. I had nothing I could accuse either of them of, really. But their relationship really bothered me. I decided I would fight for Jack's attention in every possible way. So, the next day, I took all the money I had left in my piggy bank and I bought myself a gorgeous red dress. When I came back home with a branded bag, my mom showed me an empty jewelry box. How could you? You stole from your own mother to buy gadgets and clothes? I tried to explain to my mom that I didn't take anything. Jack had been the one to give me the iPhone, but she didn't believe me. We had never had such a big fight before. I didn't want to live with my mom anymore, so I moved in with Jack without even packing anything. And I was in for a very unpleasant surprise. My boyfriend turned out to be a real slob. His apartment was dusty, every room littered with junk. I couldn't live in such a mess, so I figured the first thing I would do was clean up. I opened a drawer and I found my earring, the one that I'd lost during the yoga practice. But what was Jack doing with it? I went up to him and I showed him my find. Jack hurried to explain. I found it in the gym a few days ago and I just forgot to give it to you. Of course, I didn't believe him. My earring, the loss of my mother's jewelry, there were too many strange coincidences. So, as soon as Jack left for work, I turned his entire apartment upside down. But there was no jewelry, no money, and I did see a missed reminder on Jack's tablet. Give the earring back to Linda. Man, I was dumb. Jack didn't steal anything. I should never have even suspected him. Mom must have just lied about the theft to make Jack and me fight, and it'd give her the opportunity to get close to him. But now she would definitely fail. But I couldn't have been more wrong. A few minutes later, my dad called me and told me some terrible news. Jack had just brought my mom flowers again, and Dad decided he needed some space from her and rented a hotel room. He and Mom had had a fight. I couldn't hold back my tears. Jack had lied about going to work and had gone to see my mom instead. This was too much for me. I decided I would go to a hotel too, just long enough to sort out my feelings and figure out what was going on. Except I didn't have any money. The last of my savings I had spent on that dress. I didn't want to ask Dad for money or sell his gifts, but I thought I'd figured out a way to make some money fast. I used to sell my poems to companies that printed out greeting cards. The poem that I'd written for my mom had turned out great, so I was sure I could get a lot for that. However, after I sent it, I got a reply saying I was a fraud. I Googled a few lines of my poem, and I banged my fist on the keyboard out of anger. My verse had gone viral on social media, and only one person could be responsible for that, and they wouldn't get away with it. I went home and I trashed the place. I broke my mother's favorite vase, dishes, destroyed her paintings. Mom clutched her head and watched in silence. I was so angry I couldn't control myself. What? You don't like it when others touch what's yours without permission? No? Well, neither do I. I hate you. In tears, I went back to Jack's place and told him everything that had happened. I used the opportunity to tell him not to see my mom anymore. After all, I no longer cared about her opinion, so there was no reason for Jack to try and make her like him. He agreed, and I calmed down a little bit. However, that same evening, I saw him packing his bags in the bedroom. Where are you going? What? I didn't tell you? I was asked to give a yoga masterclass at the Capitol. I didn't remember that. I'd probably just been too exhausted because of that whole mess with my mom. So I helped Jack pack his things and I went to the airport with him. When we were standing in the queue for registration, some girl came up to us and just started staring at Jack. Why was everyone bothering him? I was just about to chase her away, but the girl suddenly pounced on him. She started slapping him and shouting curses. She called Jack by another name, Tom. I barely managed to drag that hysterical girl off my boyfriend. Stop! You're mistaking him for someone else! His name isn't Tom, it's Jack. But the girl showed me a selfie with a guy that looked a lot like Jack, except he had a mustache, dark hair, and brown eyes. I'm Helen. Trust me, I spent 6 months looking for him. He became my boyfriend, got me to trust him, and stole from my family. And then he changed his appearance and left for another country. No, my Jack, he's... But I didn't have time to finish. Jack, Tom, or whatever his real name was, dropped his suitcase and ran for the exit. Helen had been telling the truth. Jack had given me an iPhone on purpose because he knew how strict my parents were. He'd made me argue with my mom to distract us both from the fact he was stealing our stuff. My mom hadn't sold my poems. That had been him. Helen and I ran after Jack and saw him getting into a taxi outside. We stopped the first car we saw. I asked Helen to call the police and the driver to chase Jack's taxi. But the driver was going too slowly and following all the rules of the road. I couldn't let Jack get away. So I took my earrings off and I gave them to the driver. If you sell these, you'll have enough money to pay the fines and still have some left. And that worked. We drove at a breakneck speed and soon we saw Jack's car again. Our driver took a shortcut, drove out right in front of the taxi and blocked the road. But Jack wasn't even in the car anymore. He'd gotten out when we lost sight of him, and now he'd be hiding anywhere. This was the end. However, as it turned out, it wasn't time to give up yet. A police siren blared somewhere nearby. A blue light could be seen from somewhere behind the building at an intersection. The police were there. Helen and I ran there and saw Jack. The cops handcuffed him and led him to the police car. I walked up to Jack and I slapped him with all my might. Don't you ever come near me or my family again. My ex was taken to the police, and I came back home to tell my mom about everything. But she already knew. The cops had filmed everything and passed the recordings on to the local media. Mom hugged me and asked me for my forgiveness. She admitted that she'd only been flirting with my boyfriend because Dad had been way too busy with work and hadn't been paying any attention to her. Mom said that she had just wanted to make him jealous, but she had gone too far and Dad had left. That day, we finally made up. Soon, I convinced Dad to come back home, and I explained what Mom had been missing that whole time. Are you wondering what happened to Jack? He was sent to prison for fraud. And, of course, he was made to pay compensation for all the girls he'd robbed. There turned out to be 5 of us. Girls, do you know any of your boyfriend's secrets? Write them in the comments down below.